Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you are with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity, as you know, is away. Keep reading the Morning Jolt for the latest that he's learning overseas. Here in his place again today is Scott Bertram, the general manager of WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, 101.7 FM on the campus of Hillsdale College, where he is also a lecturer in journalism. Scott also directs the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, which means he hosts multiple college-related podcasts, including the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. He is also, in his spare time, the co-host of the Political Beats podcast, as well as Wasn't That Special, 50 Years of Saturday Night Live. You can subscribe to that and learn more at wasn'tthatspecial.com. So, Scott, thanks as always for being with us. We appreciate it.
Greg, there's no such thing as free time. There's only allotted time.
That's right. That's right. Hopefully it's profitable time as well. But we've got three big martinis today. Let's start with the one from Saturday, which had some people cheering and some people not too happy if they're federal employees. And that is the email that they got from Elon Musk, which really started with a truth post from President Trump saying Elon is doing a great job, meaning with Doge and finding money to cut out of the government. But I would like to see him get more aggressive. And as a result, we got an email from Elon on Saturday afternoon, early evening, to all federal employees, supposedly, saying, consistent with President @Real Donald Trump's instructions, all federal employees will shortly receive an email requesting to understand what they got done last week. Failure to respond will be taken as a resignation. And so the deadline for responding is basically midnight tonight, 11:59. And so it's gotten a little more convoluted since then because government officials in more sensitive areas are telling their people not to respond to this email, like Kash Patel at the FBI, Marco Rubio at State, now Tulsi Gabbard at DNI, and I believe DOD's on there as well. But now Elon is kind of tweaking his rationale for this. He's saying, I'm not really that interested in knowing detail by detail, although he did ask for 5 bullet points, which he got done last week. Mainly, I'm just trying to see who's even checking their email. It was to see who had a pulse and 2 working neurons. And so, Scott, on the one hand, a little bit bumpy in rolling this out, and certain departments, really can't just respond to emails with potentially sensitive things they're working on. On the other hand, most people in the private sector are generally used to giving their bosses an update on what they've done. I've got a checklist certainly each day that I go through to make sure I've done everything I need to do. So what's your take on the order and the reaction here?
In a way, it's a companion piece, right, to the return to the office orders from weeks ago. And as you pointed out in sort of a clarification post on Sunday, Elon Musk says we're checking for a pulse. We're checking to see who's out there. There was a report, and I don't remember the percentage, but right around just after COVID, there was a report that said, I think it was something like 35% of the federal workforce hadn't checked their email in a week or a month or something along those lines. So there's a concern that people are not checking in and being able to see those orders or being able to see, commands or requests from people above them, in the workforce. So that's part of it. It really is Elon Musk working under the direction of President Trump, trying to figure out exactly who's active, who's doing work, and what work they're doing. And this, again, goes to such a great divide between those who work in the private sector and those who have worked in the public sector for years or decades, or those who want to defend those who work in the public sector. I think all of us in the private sector at some point have gone through a change in leadership, whether that be a direct department head or whether that be someone at the very top of the company. And what's the first thing that happens after that? Generally, you get requests to say, okay, I got to figure out the lay of the land. What do you do here? How do you do it? What help do you need? What do you wish you could do? What can we do better? You get those questions every time there's a change in leadership in that manner, and it's not a big deal to comply and say, here's what I'm doing. Here's my weekly tasks. I wish I could do this. I think we can do this better. Here's a recommendation for that. This is sort of normal and a proper way of going about a change in leadership. But as even those on the left have conceded now in the past few weeks, when there is a change in leadership in the executive branch in Washington, D.C., now for decades, there has been no change in the way business is conducted. There's no expectation that there's a review of how this department functions or who's in charge here or if these employees are really necessary. Or that never happens. And so it's happening now, which is why sort of the normal day-to-day business is being thrown so askew, because they didn't expect it would happen. They didn't think someone would come in and actually follow through on the promise that they would go through and try to find savings and have a Department of Government Accountability and try to streamline these departments and maybe eliminate ones we don't need. This is standard fare for a vast majority of Americans, and it's not for those inside the public sector. I recognize that, but it doesn't mean it's wrong.
I think part of the reason there was such a reaction is because of the firings that happened the night before at the Pentagon with not only just the brass, but thousands of other personnel. So people are wondering what's going to happen as a result of this, how carefully they need to put in their bullet points. If he's really just checking to see who's even sentient on the federal payroll, that should help people's nerves calm. But I got to tell you, being at church yesterday, that was kind of the talk in the hallways of, we're just not sure what's going to happen here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep this job. The only other thoughts I really have here, Scott, is number one, the government spends way too much money on way too much stuff. And so cuts need to happen. And so there's going to be jobs that no longer exist. It's just a fact of the matter. And it's the way it should be. I feel bad for the people who are going to lose their jobs, but the taxpayers should be getting maximum return for their dollar. I don't know if there's a more ordered way to do this, or this is just so different for the federal workforce that it's kind of like being in shock as this happens. And so we'll see going forward. But I'm guessing the fact that Patel and Rubio and Gabbard and all these other people are telling their people to stand down, but you should probably reply by midnight. I will say that unless you've been told not to.
The first step. Reply, write down 5 simple things. It'll take 45 seconds, and then keep doing your work. Keep doing the job.
All right, Scott, on to our second martini now. And this is probably officially a bad martini because Chicago residents are still stuck with Mayor Brandon Johnson for 2 more years. If it was an election year, it might be good news because there's at least hope on the horizon that maybe somebody's slightly better. You're never going to get a great mayor in Chicago, but you could probably do better than Brandon Johnson. And Scott has dug into this poll originally reported by Politico. And it's getting a lot of response because the new poll shows that Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson's favorability rating among Chicago residents, mind you, of course, 6.6%. Now, I'm sure in a press release he'll try to remove the decimal point or something, but 6.6% favorability and 80% unfavorable. It's not there's a lot of people on the fence. 80% say that they disapprove. And the poll, when you go through the other numbers, is quite fascinating as well. 67% say that crime is Chicago's biggest issue, outpacing even high taxes and inflation. 54% said taxes, inflation 41%. In contrast, the issues the left loves to talk about, LGBTQ, 3% say that's their biggest issue. Only 4% say, quote unquote, reproductive freedoms. So, and even though the next mayoral election is a ways away, Paul Vallis, who lost to Brandon Johnson in 2023, and State Secretary of State Alexei Janulius seem to be the front runners at this point, but obviously there's a long way to go. And one of the reasons why Brandon Johnson is so unpopular is, as we said, because of the crime, but also the immigration policies that have ravaged the city. Fox News with a story that an illegal immigrant and suspected gang member is out on probation, free to roam the streets of Chicago, even though he's been charged with domestic battery, has a previous weapons charge in Cook County, and was ordered to be deported in 2022. 33-year-old Pedro Colmenares, a suspected Tren de Aragua gang member from Venezuela, entered the U.S. in September of 22, was ordered deported by immigration and judge in November of that year, according to the Department of Homeland Security. And while appealing the deportation ruling, of course, he ended up in Chicago. 2 years after the deportation ruling, he was back on DHS's radar after a weapons charge in the Chicago area. And he's still getting in trouble, and Chicago's still not doing anything to help get rid of him. So, Scott, it's not hard to see why his approval rating is in the tank, but you have a long history growing up in the Chicago suburbs and working in Chicago radio. You know the politics there well. What do you make of these cataclysmically low approval numbers for Brandon Johnson.
Well, as you mentioned, I have great experience in that region. And using that experience, I tell you, it's not good for Brandon Johnson. That's what I can tell you about it. This is Rod Blagojevich in the midst of his immense scandals where he was impeached, removed from office. The lowest number I recall him having in an opinion poll was 7%. So I don't recall if that was rounded, so equivalent. So Brandon Johnson is as popular as Rod Blagojevich when he was in the midst of giant scandals and in the process of being removed from office. 6.6% favorability, and you would probably guess that a vast majority of the 6.6% are perhaps Chicago Teachers Union members. There's a lot of different angles to this. The crime certainly, as you mentioned, is one of the top priorities that voters have, at least according to the poll. Taxes currently and taxes in the future. Brandon Johnson had promised not to raise property taxes, and in the midst of his budget proposal, proposed to raise them and then had to back off that as they got further down. City Council was upset. He doesn't have a functional City Council right now to work with. Not a functional one, but doesn't have a pliant City Council to work with as a Chicago mayor usually does, a rubber stamp of sorts, and that is out the window. There are normal perfunctory things that the council would approve that they are not approving for Johnson right now. There are bad relationships all over the place. He just said last week that he's going to fire all the people in his administration who aren't on board with him 110%. And there were 3 or 4 top deputies who were fired last week. And so, yeah, there are multiple angles here. The one that hasn't even played out yet, which could make him more unpopular, it is possible, is the developing situation with the Chicago Teachers Union and schools in Chicago, where the teachers have struck multiple times in recent years. It looks like they are getting set to strike once again. Brandon Johnson wants the city to take out this incredibly high-interest bridge loan to pay the teachers more and to funnel more money to the teachers. He is a Chicago Teachers Union guy. He technically is just on leave from the union right now, from his job there as he serves as mayor. And there's a word cloud inside this poll. You say, describe this person, and the words that are mentioned most are the biggest. So the biggest words in Johnson's word cloud are incompetent, worst, CTU, union, unqualified, terrible, racist. Again, using my vast experience, those are bad words for Brandon Johnson. But if they can't find, and he went through this whole thing where he was trying to fire not the head of the head of Chicago Public Schools, who wouldn't agree to this request to take this loan out. And so this hasn't even come to fruition yet. They're still trying to figure out if they can work an agreement between Chicago Public Schools and the union. If they can't and the union goes on strike, people are going to blame Brandon Johnson. He is seen as a puppet of the union and seen as a guy who's using the leverage of the mayor's office to get the teachers' union as much as possible, even if it means taking out these just terribly high-interest loans that the city of Chicago and taxpayers have to pay in the future. It's been a disaster. It's 2 years until the next election, not to mention the months after that he would still be in office before someone else takes over. And you see the 6.6% approval rating. There is actually a head-to-head matchup here, and he's at like 8% support, which means at least 2% of people who don't like him would vote for him still for some reason. But those aren't great numbers. Chicago just had a one-and-done in Lori Lightfoot. They certainly could have another one-and-done here in Brandon Johnson. And it's another example, too, of really incompetent leadership by Democrats and liberals in our big cities. You see it in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, in California with the fires, both in the governor's mansion and some of the local authorities, Los Angeles area. Democrats should be freaking out about this, too, because every time that their leaders are forced to sort of show their work, how have you helped this place? They can't. And instead you get stories like this where everyone hates them and there are big problems and they can't put out fires and there's corruption. And it's another black mark. When they do get a chance to govern, these are the results you have.
Yeah, an 80% disapproval rating usually is a green light to somebody trying to run against him, and we'll see how many get into the race. It was a pretty crowded field last time, and Lori Lightfoot didn't even make the runoff. So I'm guessing that's going to be the case again for Brandon Johnson unless a lot changes. Just a couple of quick points and a question before we exit on this one, Scott. First of all, I'm glad he's feeling the wrath of the citizens over trying to break his pledge over not to raise property taxes. Property taxes are perhaps my most hated tax. I've bought this thing. I should own it. So why am I still paying rent to you? And why will you take my property if I don't pay you? That seems to be one of the most unfair taxes out there. Also, I can tell that the city council, at least some of these members, want a political future and that voting and rubber stamping stuff for Brandon Johnson is not the path to get there. But I'm confused, though, Scott, about his desire to fire people in the administration who don't see eye to eye with him. I'm told that is destroying democracy.
Yes, of course. Well, this is only a city level and I guess not country level. And maybe that's the difference. A lot of what Brandon Johnson has executed could be called very Trump-like. And again, it's not being met with the same sort of, shall we say, resistance in other places, although at least the favorability polls would say people don't like it.
But my last question is, did anybody poll Chicago residents on Matt Eberflus the day after Thanksgiving? I'm trying to figure out if this is the lowest approval number ever.
I don't know of anything official done on Eberflus after Thanksgiving. So even then, friends and family gets you to around 5%. So it'd be awfully close.
For those who don't know, Matt Eberflus was the coach of the Chicago Bears who found numerous ways to lose games that were either winnable or, in many cases, believed to have been won. And on Thanksgiving, his clock management not only cost him the game potentially, but cost him his job the next day. So hopefully the Bears have more competent leadership now. It would appear that they do. But nonetheless, Brandon Johnson, I'm sure he's going to be pushing hard. I can't wait for the spin. Scott. Hey, you didn't even round up. It's 7. It's 7. I tell you, it's 7.
The spin is that the city of Chicago is racist because that is Brandon Johnson's response to any criticism of anything he does while in office, is that he has critics and they are all racist. So 80% of the city of Chicago, apparently, are racists.
You go with that, Brandon Johnson. I'm sure it'll work out great for you, especially in Chicago. All right, let's talk about another great new sponsor, and that is ZocDoc. When was the last time you needed to go to a doctor or felt like you probably should, but you put it off? Maybe because you just assumed you'd get better or that pain would go away, or we've all been there. But thanks to ZocDoc, there's no reason to delay. They make it so easy to find and book a doctor that's right for you. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality, in-network doctors and click to instantly book an appointment. Yes, they can figure out which ones take your insurance. You look at verified users and their reviews, and obviously the more reviews, the better, and figure out who you can trust to deal with whatever it is that you're dealing with. I've used ZocDoc in the past, not only to find physicians, but someone referred a doctor to me, and it was very easy to just get online, book the appointment. You don't have to call in and hope that you're not put on hold for 20 minutes. It's a great, great deal. I've used ZocDoc, and I think you should too. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/3ML and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/3ML. ZocDoc.com/3ML. All right, on to our final martini now, Scott. And we thought this issue was kind of fading away. Trump signed the executive order banning males from girls and women's sports, but some states are holding out. Tim Walz in Minnesota, big shock. Gavin Newsom in California, big shock. But some others doing that as well. One of them is Maine, and you probably saw this dust up on Friday when the National Governors Association was at the White House, and Trump decided to specifically point out Maine Governor Janet Mills, and that led to this exchange.
The NCAA has complied immediately, by the way. That's good. But I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor of Maine?
I'm here.
Are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good. I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
He always gets the pejorative shot in at the end. But Friday was a big day for this topic because Scott was sitting in on the Steve Gruber show and had Michigan Congressman Tim Walberg on the program, who is now chairman of the House Education and Workforce Committee. And Michigan is also not complying with this. The Michigan High School Athletic Association, as Scott will explain in the question here, not following suit with what the president wants to do.
The Michigan High School Athletic Association has decided to uphold its policy allowing them to take part. So what happens now? Is there funding perhaps at risk? What's the next step if a high school association says we're not going to abide by the executive order?
Well, the next step will be enacting a punishment on them. If they want to do it, fine. But the federal revenues that come to them, at the very least for their athletic programs that are commingled or used in the athletic programs, I would recommend that they be withdrawn. This is the law. And you don't thumb your nose at the law without expecting the discipline that comes from it.
And so, Scott, how do you expect this to play out now? Because some states have their own policies. The Trump executive order is really about federal funding, which he explained there to Janet Mills of Maine. It's not an order that you have to stop, but there's a lot of incentive to stop. And it's an 80-20 issue, at least, that the Democrats keep stepping on this rake. So ultimately, are they just going to keep losing over and over again, or are they finally going to relent here?
It should be a fight that President Trump welcomes, and judging by the clip, he does, because it is one of these 80-20 issues that we've talked about much since the start of the year, since President Trump won and then took office, that he seems to find himself on the right side of these 80-20 issues. And people look at the other side and say, you're defending and supporting a position staked out by such a small percentage of the population. But they are beholden to that small percentage of the population. As you say, they can do what they want to do, but there's funding attached. And as I think we talked one of the last fill-in times I was here, anytime you accept money from the federal government, there are potential strings attached in virtually any way if you don't want to abide by the federal speed limit law, you won't get money for construction purposes. President Obama, his administration took the nuns to court because they didn't want to comply with Obamacare regulations regarding abortion. So this is nothing new, that there's an executive order, there's a law, you don't want to comply, that's okay, do what you want to do, but you don't get the money. So I don't see the governor of Maine, the Michigan High School Association. I thought I saw something, a follow-up where they sort of backed off a little and said, well, let's wait for guidance on this. It seems unlikely that many who stake out a position will be able to backtrack on that, because it would go against everything that they are saying as they take the position in the first place. What are they going to say? Well, I thought that it mattered and you should, but now clearly I see, because we're going to lose money, that we shouldn't do that. And, that they could backfill that money in various ways at the state level too, right? That there are ways to sort of maneuver around this. But Donald Trump, both, politically, and on other levels, is taking a stand that says this is where the vast, vast majority of American people are. It's a very popular position to take. We're going to bring it down to the state level from the federal level. If you don't like it, you're not going to get the money. You can do whatever you like. You can fund it different ways, but that's going to shut off.
My question here, Scott, because growing up in Michigan, I'm somewhat familiar with the MHSAA, obviously being a big sports fan. Is this their call, or is this Gretchen Whitmer putting her thumb on the scale?
I don't have a real good sense about that, so it's hard for me to say. Governor Whitmer, by the way, has been very quiet on a whole lot of things since the start of the year. In fact, she was booked to be on Meet the Press on NBC yesterday, on Sunday, and canceled, I believe, late on Friday at the last minute, to the point where Meet the Press had a little announcement that said Gretchen Whitmer is supposed to be here, and then she canceled last minute. So it's actually very hard to get a complete read on where Governor Whitmer is on a lot of these things these days. She is probably positioning for a run for president in 2028. She's term limited out, as we've talked about running for governor again the next cycle. But she has been kind of strangely quiet and sort of strangely unattentive to sort of the basic blocking and tackling that you would expect from a governor, especially one whose thinking about running nationwide in 2028. So I don't anticipate she'd be one to come out at this point, again, for various reasons, and say, well, no, we will comply with President Trump's executive order on this matter. But I do think it's interesting she has not been quite so vocal about where she is or what she thinks the state should do on the issue.
And just thinking about it, she probably is trying to stay away from the hot button issues without alienating that part of the party that she'll probably need at least a chunk of to do well in 2028. It does remind me, though, that in 2021, my high school played for a state championship. They did not win. But in the spring of 2021, it was still mandatory. The MHSAA mandated that the players wear masks on the court during the games. Now, by about 2 minutes into the game, they all had them under their chins. But nonetheless, the idea that you're supposed to be sprinting end to end with that over your face, maybe the MHSAA is run by people who are just naturally sympathetic to that, because what a ridiculous policy that was.
Yeah, you'd see the pictures, in the newspaper the next day, someone going up for a layup and the masks were all down by the chin. A lot of good that's doing. Yeah.
Talk about political theater. Anyway, Scott, always great to have you with us. I believe we'll see you again on Thursday.
That's the plan, sir. Yes.
Scott Bertram is the general manager of WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, 101.7 FM on the campus of Hillsdale College. He is a lecturer in journalism there and directs the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, hosts the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, co-host of the Political Beats podcast, co-host of Wasn't That Special, 50 years of Saturday Night Live. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about it as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us all on X. Scott is at Scott Bertram with just 1 T in Scott. Jim, of course, at Jim Garrity, and I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific Monday. Join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.